About that time the horses went right up out the side of the canyon on the left-hand side. And it was so steep that the horses was reaching for the ground and putting her falling over backwards. And I jumped off and grabbed my horse's rein, pulled him back, keep him from falling over backwards. And we followed the horses on out of the canyon. And when we got out of the van, he was leading his horse behind mine. And we had to hold down on the reins, keep him from falling over backwards into the canyon. And we finally worked our way up on top, and we got up on top, and by that time it was dark. Van said, "What do we do now?" Well, I said, "You still want your horse, don't you?" "Why, sure I want her." Well, I said, "Take off your hat." He said, "No, what the hell I want to take my hat off for?" And I said, "Well, you don't usually kneel down in prayer with your hat on." I said, "You take your hat off." He said, "You what?" I said, "Well, you want your mare, don't you?" "Well, sure." Well, I said, "My horse is pooed, and your horse is pooed." And I said, "The horses are already gone." And I said, "They're half a mile ahead of us by now, close to it." And I said, "We got to have some extra help or we're not going to get her tonight." And he said, "You really mean that, don't you?" I said, "Yeah." So he took his hat off and I took my hat off, and we kneeled down there on the ground. And I thanked the Lord for all the fun we'd had that day and for being able to find the mare. And Van still needed his horse, and we needed some help. And we did that. And Van said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "Well, you don't ask somebody for some help unless you're going to help them." I said, "Just go get your horse." Well, he says, "It's dark." I said, "Yeah, but I said, we got to do our part." So we got on our horses and we went down the ridge where the horses had went. And we got down there about where they'd been when we kneeled down to pray, and maybe a little further down, and we heard a horse whinner. And Van says, "What's that?" I said, "That's your horse." "Oh," he said. I said, "Yeah." So we rode on down a little ways and rode out in a little open place there, and there was Van's horse standing there waiting for us. So I told Van, I said, "Get off and put your arm around her neck and put the rope around her neck." And he said, "Huh?" And I said, "Get off your horse and go put the rope around her neck." So he got off his horse and he walked over to his mare, and she just stood there, and he started to put the rope around her neck, and boy, she snorted and she left there. She went to catch the other horses. Now anybody knows there's a wild horse with another bunch of wild horses don't stop and wait for a couple of cowboys unless they've received some kind of a reason to stop. Anyway, Van said, "What do we do now?" I said, "Well," I said, "I guess your faith wasn't strong enough for you to have it." He said, "Hell, man, I didn't have no faith to start with." Well, I said, "Okay." I said, "Anyway," I said, "we found your mare," and I said, "We'll come back tomorrow and get her." So we rode back to where we'd left the truck. We got back home about 3 o'clock in the morning, and we fed our horses and got us something to eat and went to bed. And about 6 o'clock we was on our way back down there. And we went right back to where we'd last seen the mare and got on their tracks, and we trailed them, and we was trailing along. Van looked over at me and he said, "Don't you think we need some extra help today?" And I said, "What do you mean?" I said, He said, "Don't you think we ought to pray?" I said, "I already said my prayers this morning. The Lord already knows what I want to do." I said, "Didn't you say yours?" He said, "No." Well, I said, "If you think we ought to have some prayer," I said, "I think we better too." So we got off our horses. I told Van, I said, "You do the praying this time." So we kneeled down there, and Van, he asked the Lord to help us get his mare that he needed. we got back on our horses, and followed them right. They was going right down City Canyon. We got down City Canyon. Oh, we must have went down there 6 or 8 miles before we finally caught up with the horses. And there they was grazing around, and so Van said, "What do we do now?" And I said, "Same thing we did yesterday, only this time I'll get her." I said, "I'll go out of the canyon, I'll come down in the bottom, and you bring them to me just like you did yesterday." And I said, "I'll get her this time." I said, "I won't yank on it till I'm sure it's over her head." And so I went out of the canyon, down the ridge, and back into the canyon, and got stationed out, and there was another place down there. Looked just like the place before. Had a great big high bank, 30, 40 feet high, where the trail went around the water, around the big pool of water, and it was about, 200 or 300 feet across that pool of water. And so I figured, well, I'll let her get by that cut bank, and then I'll cut right across and won't have to get in behind any horses. I'll just cut right across this water, and I'll crowd her up against that bank, and I'll rope her this time. So I got over behind the tree, and I sat there quite a while, and pretty soon I could hear the horses coming. Here they come. They come out of the brush into the canyon, that little opening, and went over around the trail to go around that big pool of water, and so I waited till that Van there got right even with where I knew I'd just be right in the right place, and I touched the spurs of my horse, and I headed across that pool of water to catch her. And about the third jump my horse made in that water, we went down, down, down. Went right on out of sight. My hat was floating on top of the water, and I thought we never was going to reach the bottom. And my horse finally got down to the bottom. It seemed like he just stood there a while. And then he lunged back up. And when we come back up on top of the water, Van was just going by with the horses. And there I was out in the middle of the water. So I swung my horse out of the water and got my hat off the top of the water, and I took on down the trail to catch up with Van. I just got around the bend, a little ways down the bend, and the Indian had put a fence across the canyon right down below where I was. And when the horses had hit that fence, Van was crowding along close enough, and when they turned along that fence, Van, he just rode in and roped his mare. He had her on the end of a rope when I got there. And I got there, I was dripping wet with water, and it was starting to snow just a little bit. And he said, "Where in the world did you go?" And I said, "Oh, I decided to stop and take a bath. I didn't think you'd be there any sooner."
Horse and all.
Anyway, we built us a fire, and I took my clothes off, and we wrung them out, and we held them up around that fire and dried them up a little bit. And after we got my clothes dried out, I put them back on, and we headed down to the CBQ service station. That's where we told Mother and Jean to meet us that night. And we got down there, what was it, midnight? No, quite a while after dark, wasn't it?
Yes, it was.
Anyway,
is, huh?
we had Van's mare with us. We just loaded them in the horse trailer and took them home. And next day we was on the roundup. But don't ever be afraid to ask the Lord for what you want, and if He thinks you need it bad enough, why, He'll let you have it.